Nullig Naman was the 6th of January, also known as Women's Christmas, Little Christmas. So my mum went missing that next day, the day after. So we're trying to get that significant day for people to remember. This beach was active that day. People walked by my mum with dogs. People walked before my mum. I just appeal for anyone that has maybe even photographs on the beach that day, or any dashcam footage, or maybe even CCTV if they're in a house nearby that you can see. And I suppose I'm really appealing for the other end of the beach where the Malahide car park would be, and you'd have the shops there, and there's always someone out walking their dog, or people on this beach. So please, if you can try and jog your memories. Did you see the description of my mum? A black bobble hat, a puffer black coat, black Nike leggings, black Nike runners with a white chunky sole. That's what I'm looking for, please.
At some point before noon on a Friday morning, Bernadette Connolly stood on a beach on the North Dublin coast and raised her phone. She took a photograph. It was the last thing she ever did. Within hours, she was gone. Within days, her clothing would be found on the sand where she had been standing. And within 6 weeks, her body would be discovered on a beach, not in Ireland. Not on the coastline where she was last seen. Not anywhere the search had focused. In Blackpool. In the north of England. Across the Irish Sea. 200 miles from where she disappeared. How does a woman vanish from a beach in County Dublin and end up washed ashore on the Lancashire coast? How does someone take a photograph, that single, final, inexplicable photograph, and then disappear so completely that even the sea had to cross an international border to return what it took? Those are the questions that a family fought to answer. That investigators pursued across weeks of searching. That a senior coroner formally examined in a formal legal proceeding. And the questions that, at the end of all of it, remained. Because the coroner who heard the evidence, who weighed every piece of the case, every witness, every document, every fact the investigation had been able to establish, returned to his conclusion with a phrase that is precise and careful and almost unbearably insufficient. He said, "She probably entered the sea. But it cannot be established how or why." That is where this case ends. With probably. With cannot be established. With a woman who, by every account from the people who knew her, had no reason to walk into the January sea. And with a beach that said otherwise. This is the story of Bernadette Connolly. Her name was Bernadette Mary Connolly. 45 years old. Long black hair. Hazel eyes. A tattoo on her lower back. A smile that, by every account from the people who knew her, was the first thing you noticed. The kind you remember long after the rest of a person has blurred. She lived in Swords, a working town in North County Dublin, sitting on the commuter corridor between the capital and the airport. Ordinary and lived in. The kind of place where life has a shape and people are part of it. She had one daughter, Jade, 25 years old. That relationship, mother and daughter, Bernadette and Jade, is the emotional spine of this story. When Bernadette disappeared, it was Jade who stepped forward. Who stood on the beach. Who held herself together in front of the cameras because breaking down was a luxury that had to wait until the search was over. She said later that she and her mother had shared 30 years together. 30 years of closeness, the kind where you know someone's moods and their fears and the 1,000 small things that accumulate into the shape of a person. Jade knew her mother. That knowledge would become both her anchor and her torment. By January 2022, Bernadette was in the middle of a transition. She had accepted redundancy during the pandemic and a new career was underway. The inquest into her death would hear this specifically. It was cited as evidence of someone building forward. Planning ahead. Her GP, Dr. Ellen Jones, knew her well enough to submit a formal written report to the coroner. The report stated plainly, Bernadette had never expressed anything about ending her own life. Not once. No history of mental health crisis. Nothing in the clinical picture that pointed toward danger. Senior Coroner Alan Wilson later summarized what all the evidence said about her life: a loving family, no financial concerns, a new career, a nice Christmas just behind her. And one more detail, one that investigators and family members kept returning to. She had recently paid her health insurance, and the inquest heard it as part of a broader picture of someone building toward a future, not away from one. And then, on the morning of Friday the 7th of January, 2022, she left her home in Swords, got into a taxi, and headed north toward the coast. She did not tell her daughter where she was going. She did not come back. Let's build the timeline carefully. Because in a case where so much is uncertain, the things that are established matter enormously. Every confirmed fact is an anchor. Everything else is the void around it. Friday the 7th of January, 2022. The day after Women's Christmas. A grey taxi came to Bernadette Connolly's home in Swords. She got in. She was wearing a black coat. She was carrying a black handbag. Beneath the coat, black Nike training gear. Black top, black leggings. Black trainers with a white sole. A black woolly hat with a black bobble. The taxi headed north. At approximately 11:50 in the morning, the grey taxi pulled into the car park of the Shoreline Hotel in Donabate. Bernadette got out. And here is the first thing that doesn't fit. Because when the taxi arrived at the Shoreline Hotel, Bernadette was not wearing the coat. She was not carrying the handbag. Both items were gone. What she was wearing, as she stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the camera, was the black training gear alone: the top, the leggings, the trainers, the hat. The coat and the handbag had disappeared somewhere between Swords and Donabate. Gardaí confirmed this in documented statements, noting specifically that at the time of her disappearance she was no longer in possession of those items. The taxi driver was identified. The taxi driver was found and spoken to by investigators. Whatever that conversation established was never made public. The destination of those two items, a black coat and a black handbag, has never been publicly explained. There is a gap in that morning. A period between leaving home and arriving at the hotel car park. Something happened. Something was left somewhere, or handed to someone, or set down. We don't know what. We don't know where. We don't know if it mattered. But it is a gap. And in a case of gaps, even the ones that seem small deserve marking. The CCTV at the Shoreline Hotel car park captured what happened next. A woman in black. Walking from the taxi. Moving steadily toward the entrance to Donabate Beach. The hat pulled down. The stride purposeful. Not hurried, not hesitant. Walking like someone who knows where they are going. That is the last confirmed footage of Bernadette Connolly anywhere. The CCTV clip is brief. She is in frame for seconds. The camera catches her and then loses her as she moves beyond its range. And then she is past the car park, past the hotel, past the last lens that would see her, and ahead of her is the beach. Donabate Beach. Long and flat and exposed on the North Dublin coast. In January, cold, open, largely empty. The kind of beach where the wind arrives off the sea without anything to break it. Bernadette walked toward it. And then, within the next hour, within the time between her arrival at 11:50 and whatever came after, she did one final thing. She took a photograph. A photograph of Malahide Bay. The estuary that runs to the south of Donabate, separating the peninsula from the coastal settlement of Malahide. Wide and tidal and, in the right light, genuinely beautiful, the kind of view that makes people reach for their phones without quite deciding to. The far shore of Malahide visible across the water. The light on the surface. She raised her phone. She framed the shot. She took the picture. She did not send it to anyone. She did not message her daughter. She did not call anyone. She did not leave any caption, any note, any digital record of why she took it or what she was thinking. She took a photograph of the water. And then her phone went silent. No further calls. No further messages. No further activity of any recorded kind. The photograph of Malahide Bay was the last act Bernadette Connolly performed that we know about. The last digital trace of a living person. Investigators would return to it again and again in the weeks that followed, trying to read something in it, trying to understand why, in the last minutes of her known existence, this was the thing she chose to do. They never arrived at a satisfying answer. Neither has anyone else. But there was something else on that beach. Something that investigators found in the days after she vanished. Something that was not prominently disclosed during the early public appeals, that changed the nature of the search quietly, from the inside. Her clothing. Found on Donabate Beach. The black Nike training gear captured on the CCTV camera, the top, the leggings, the trainers, the hat. Left on the sand. In January. On a cold and largely empty stretch of North Dublin coastline. This detail would later be formally confirmed by senior coroner Alan Wilson in his narrative conclusion. He stated it as established fact, her clothing was located on Donabate Beach. Think about what that means. Think about what it doesn't prove. A person can remove clothing for reasons that are not sinister. But a person who leaves their clothing on a January beach, after a morning when they told no one where they were going, after a phone that went silent after a single photograph, that is a set of facts that points in a direction. Investigators, by the end of the first weeks, likely knew what they were now looking for. Not a lost person. Something the water would eventually return. Hours passed on the afternoon of January 7th. Bernadette did not come home. The evening came. January darkness, early and complete. Jade reported her mother missing. Swordsgarda Station took the case. In the days that followed, the investigation traced the taxi, identified the driver, reviewed the CCTV. They contacted hospitals across the region, no result. They searched the Donabate area. They found no trace. 2 weeks passed. The investigation crossed a threshold it could not publicly name. The clothing had been found. The phone had been silent since the photograph. What the evidence was describing was not a woman who had wandered and needed help. The question the search was trying to answer had quietly changed. On the 28th of January, 3 weeks to the day since Bernadette was last seen, and Garda Síochána escalated publicly. Garda Inspector Nolene McKenna renewed the appeal before the media. New CCTV footage was released, the Shoreline Hotel clip, the brief seconds of a woman in black walking toward the beach. It broadcast nationally, spread across every platform in Ireland within hours. Her face, the family photograph, long dark hair, that smile, appeared on screens and feeds from Dublin to the diaspora. And Jade Connolly came to the beach. She stood at the entrance to Donabate Strand, at the same spot where her mother had walked past a camera for the last time 3 weeks earlier, and she made her appeal. She was composed. That is the word that appears again and again in accounts of that morning. A 25-year-old whose mother had been missing for 3 weeks, standing at the last place she was seen, composed, because composure was what the moment required. Because breaking down was a luxury for later, when there was no more work to do. She spoke with precision. She said, "This beach was active that day. People walked by my mam. People walked before my mam with dogs. Somebody has a photograph from that day on their phone right now. Somebody's dashcam captured something they don't know about. Somebody who lives nearby has CCTV footage they haven't thought to review." She specifically appealed to anyone who had been on the Malahide side of the estuary, the far shore that Bernadette had photographed, asking what they might have seen from across the water. She said, "How no one has seen anything is just really beyond me." Gardaí were present at both Donabate Beach and the Malahide car park that day, speaking to passers-by, handing out leaflets, putting eyes on the coast. A vigil had already been held at St. Cronan's Church in Swords. A community had gathered for a woman most of them knew only from a CCTV still, a figure in black, walking, caught at the last moment before disappearing. The specific, actionable information the investigation needed, the dashcam, the beach photograph, the witness who had walked past her and not yet realized it, did not come. The appeals went unanswered by the evidence they needed. By the time Jade stood on that beach, the answer was already 200 miles away. The Irish Sea is not calm. It is not predictable. It does not give things back on any schedule a person could map. In winter, the water temperature along the North Dublin coast drops to between 7 and 10 degrees Celsius. Cold water shock, the involuntary physiological response to sudden cold immersion, can incapacitate even a strong swimmer within minutes. The gasp reflex. Rapid muscle failure. A person who enters that water may lose the ability to make decisions about what to do next before they have finished making them. Bernadette Connolly could swim. The inquest noted this. But swimming ability and cold water survival are not the same thing. From the North Dublin coast, currents run generally northward before bending east toward Britain. A body that enters the water there, under the right tidal conditions, can travel significant distance. What the record shows, she disappeared from the North Dublin coast in early January. Her body was recovered in Blackpool on February 4. 28 days. 200 miles. The search was looking in the right direction. Just the wrong distance. The water had carried her somewhere no search operation would have thought to look. She was beyond finding. Until the tide decided otherwise. February 4, 2022. A Friday. The same day of the week she had disappeared. 28 days later. At 2:49 in the afternoon, a call was placed to the Lancashire Constabulary in Blackpool, England. A body had been found on the promenade, close to the steps leading down from the seafront to the beach. Left there by the receding tide, as if the sea had been carrying something it finally decided to put down. Officers attended. The scene was examined. There was no indication the woman had been the victim of any crime. No evidence of violence. No circumstances that suggested the involvement of another person. What was present was a body that had arrived from the sea, deposited by the water on a seaside promenade in the north of England on a February afternoon. Blackpool. Let that land for a moment. Not the coast of Fingal. Not the Dublin coastline. Not anywhere in the country where she was born, where her daughter was waiting, where the investigation was centered, where the vigils had been held. Blackpool. Lancashire. England. The body could not be identified by appearance. Not after 28 days in the water. DNA analysis was initiated. A sample from the body was compared against genetic material provided by Jade Connolly, the daughter. The 25-year-old who had stood at Donabate Beach a week before her mother's body washed up in England, asking people to jog their memories, saying she just couldn't understand how no one had seen anything. She was right that no one had seen anything useful. She could not have known that the answer had already left Irish waters entirely. The DNA analysis took time. More waiting. The kind where you already know what the answer is going to be but aren't yet required to live with it as fact. On Thursday, the 3rd of March, 2022, Garda Síochána issued a statement. It was brief. Following the recovery of a body on the coastline in Blackpool on the 4th of February, and confirmed DNA analysis from UK police, the missing person appeal in respect of Bernadette Connolly, 45 years, had been stood down. Stood down. The official phrase for, "This is over now. We know where she is. She is not coming home the way we hoped." And Garda Síochána thanked the media and the public for their assistance in the matter. That was the statement. Jade Connolly's statement was not brief. On Instagram, she wrote. She wrote about her beloved mam. About 30 years together. About her mother's smile and her strong character and her love. She wrote that from day one, her family had received unconditional and tireless support across the nation and worldwide, support they could not express enough gratitude for. She wrote, "As her daughter, I truly know I did all I could in my power to find her." And then the line that the Irish public had been hoping to read in an entirely different form, hoping to read as a relief, a resolution, a wrong turn that turned back into something ordinary. Instead they read it like this: "We prayed for people to light a path to bring her home. And we're so grateful to have her back. And we can now lay her to rest." Bernadette Connolly came home. Not walking through the door. Not found safe somewhere and reunited with her daughter. Not the version of this story that the country had been holding its breath hoping for. Carried home from the English coast. Identified by her daughter's DNA. Returned to Ireland to be buried. They laid her to rest. The questions did not rest with her. In July 2022, 6 months after Bernadette disappeared, 5 months after her body was found, a formal inquest was held at Blackpool Town Hall. Because her body had been recovered in Lancashire, the matter fell under English coroner jurisdiction. Senior Coroner Alan Wilson presided. The inquest heard from Dr. Ellen Jones. Her report was unambiguous. Bernadette had never expressed anything about ending her own life. Not once. No history of mental health crisis. No red flag of any kind. The family's position was stated clearly: she would not have taken her own life. It was not a hope. It was a conviction, built from decades of knowing her. The coroner considered it all. The GP's report. The new career. The health insurance. The family's certainty. And the physical evidence, the CCTV, the photograph, the clothing on the beach, the body in Blackpool. He could not reach a conclusion of suicide. The evidence didn't support it to the required threshold. He could not reach misadventure or accidental death. So he returned a narrative conclusion. The coroner's formal mechanism for exactly this situation, when the facts are established, but what they mean isn't. When something happened, clearly and demonstrably, but the how and why resist any verdict a single word could carry. The narrative recorded what was known. Bernadette went missing January 7th. Her clothing was found on Donabate Beach. Her body was found in Blackpool on February 4th. And then the line that closes the official record. She probably entered the sea. But it cannot be established how or why. Return to it. Because the photograph is where this case lives. The detail everyone, investigators, the inquest, the family, anyone who has followed this story, cannot stop returning to. She arrived at the Shoreline Hotel car park at 11:50. Within the following hour, she took a photograph of Malahide Bay. One image. No message. No call. No context. She photographed the water. The wide, flat estuary with Malahide visible on the far shore. The sky. The light on the surface. Why? It could be entirely mundane. The view from that shore is genuinely beautiful. People photograph it constantly. She may have seen something in the light and reached for her phone the way anyone does, without it meaning anything beyond, "That's lovely." It could be a moment of stillness. A deliberate pause before something. A woman standing at the edge of cold water, wanting to hold an image of the world before whatever came next. It could be a goodbye. There. The word. The possibility the family refused, the coroner could not confirm, and the GP's evidence worked against, but that the physical facts of the case keep pointing toward. Nobody knows which is true. The bay in the photograph is just a bay. Holding nothing except water and light. The photograph exists. And it says nothing. And it says everything. And we do not know which. Some cases resolve cleanly when the evidence is examined carefully. The Garda investigation was thorough. The inquest was formal and properly conducted. Nobody involved in the official response to this case failed at their job. And still the questions remain. So let's be precise about what the record actually says. Confirmed, Bernadette left Swords by taxi on the morning of January 7th, arrived at the Shoreline Hotel car park in Donabate at approximately 11:50, was captured on CCTV walking toward the beach, took a photograph of Malahide Bay within the following hour, and had no further recorded phone activity after that. Confirmed, her clothing was found on Donabate Beach. The taxi driver was identified and spoken to. All hospitals were contacted with no result. Extensive searches were conducted. Confirmed, a body was discovered on the Blackpool Promenade on February 4, 2022, with nothing at the scene to indicate criminal involvement. DNA analysis using a sample from Jade Connolly confirmed the identity. The missing person appeal was stood down on March 3, 2022. Confirmed, Senior Coroner Alan Wilson returned a narrative conclusion in July 2022. Bernadette's GP reported no history of suicidal ideation. The coroner recorded no verdict of suicide, misadventure, or accidental death. Not confirmed, the whereabouts of the coat and handbag she left Swords wearing. Not confirmed, why she chose Donabate. Not confirmed, what happened in the minutes after the phone went silent. Not confirmed, how she entered the water, or why. Not confirmed, what the photograph meant. Not confirmed, how she died. That last one is not a flourish. It is the literal finding of a formal legal proceeding. The manner of Bernadette Connolly's death was not established. Time in the water, the absence of a witness, the nature of the sea in January, together they prevented it. And so it remains open. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with cases like this. Not the grief of loss, which is terrible enough. The grief of loss without explanation. A question that deserves a real answer, given only a narrative verdict and 2 words, probably, cannot. Jade Connolly has to live with that. She said, after the confirmation, that she knew she had done everything in her power to find her mother. She had. She stood on that beach. She made those appeals. She put her own face in front of cameras on the worst weeks of her life because there was still work to do. And she brought her mother home. Not the way she prayed for, but home. Laying someone to rest and understanding what happened to them are not the same thing. The burial ends the practical search. The vigil ends the public search. The inquest ends the official search. The question persists. Not loudly. Steadily. As a weight that doesn't get lighter because there is nothing to set it down onto. Why did she go to Donabate? What did she see when she photographed the bay? What happened in the minutes after the phone went silent? These are not questions that the inquest answered, or that time has softened into something easier to carry. They are the permanent residue of a case that ended without ending. There is a photograph on a phone somewhere. Malahide Bay. January 2022. Taken by a woman in black standing on the North Dublin coast in the cold morning air, sometime before noon on the 7th of January. The bay is still there. The estuary still moves between Donabate and Malahide, cold and tidal, indifferent to what it witnessed. The Shoreline Hotel is still there. The car park is still there. If you stood at that entrance on a January morning and looked south toward the estuary, you would see exactly what she photographed. The wide flat water. The far shore. The light. She saw something worth capturing. She raised her phone. She took the picture. And then she was gone. She probably entered the sea. But it cannot be established how or why. Bernadette Connolly. 45 years old. Long black hair. Hazel eyes. Strong character. A smile people remembered. A daughter who loved her. A life that, by every measure the evidence offers, she had not finished living. She walked toward the beach. She took a photograph of the water. And the sea took the rest.